So instead of creating the new intro to reflect the mirror universe, they just turned everything upside down and made it darker and kept all the same Starfleet symbols on everything. So that was ridiculous and lazy. And whenever we see the actual droids in the mirror universe, they just look a little bit darker. It reminds me of how in the new Star Wars movies, we see like an evil version of the BB-8 droid. Instead of being yellow and light and all of that, instead it looks dark and black and all of that, and that's why it's evil. And so whenever they show us the droids in this episode, they all look kind of dark, and they're evil because they're dark, and that's it. And we never see the droids actually doing anything. They're not part of the plot in any way, so they're just props. They're just background characters like the extras, like the wheelchair guy in the corridors.
Timber!
So a lot of this episode just feels kind of lazy. So no Lorca, just a huge cop-out after saying his name so many times, not showing him. Is so annoying, such a missed opportunity. And then the plot twist with the Guardian of Forever. So we see this Carl guy, who is kind of like Doctor Who, kind of a Time Lord kind of figure. And then they ask him who you are really. And then he suddenly says, I am, and with the voiceover from TOS, I am the Guardian of Forever. And it's just the same sound clip from the TOS episode, The City on the Edge of Forever. They just played the exact same sound clip of the Guardian saying that it's the Guardian of Forever. They just play it on top of him. And so for a moment I was like, what the hell? Is this a kind of a fan edit of this episode? Am I watching a fake episode or what? It sounds so ridiculous, it just didn't fit at all. And why did they have to use the same exact voice for it? And then they show that wooden door exploding, and then it turns into the Guardian of Forever, which does at least kind of look similar to the one from TOS, but it's not identical. It's kind of 25% different, and it's not a prop. It just looks like a cheap CGI version of it, and it has like the time tunnel inside it, and so it doesn't really look like the same effect we saw in TOS. I'm obviously not expecting the same exact effect, because back then it just looked like smoke inside the gate, and now it looks like a time tunnel. And then he reveals that all of this was basically like a test to see if Georgiou is still evil or not. And I guess she's not evil because she didn't kill Michael right away. Instead, she tried to change her. And she just tortured her for 3 months, which is somehow supposed to be less evil than just killing her right away. And she killed her later, so it's less evil because she tried not to kill her, I guess. And she spared the Kelpian and all of that. So she's not as evil as she was before. And because of that, the Guardian will give her another chance to live and so on. And by the way, the thing with Saru also is a continuity mistake. Because they said that he's getting his Varhai or whatever that thing is that the Kelpians always got harvested before that. Because they're going crazy when they lose their ganglia and whatever. So the Baul always killed them before that happens, and in the Empire they also got eaten before they went through their transformation. And so Saru says that he's going through the transformation and he wants to get killed, and then she doesn't kill him, she spares him, and she tells him to just lock himself in a room, and a few days later he'll be fine. And then we see all of that happening, and all of this is taking place at least half a year before the events we saw in the mirror universe in the first season, even though they did say that she lived there for 3 months, but it's still way before the events that we saw in season 1. And so how come we saw Saru in season 1? How come he didn't undergo that thing in season 1 if it happens here? So this is yet another continuity mistake. If he's going through the Varhai thing in this episode, why did it not happen to him in season 1 when we saw the mirror universe? He was still there, he was still Michael's slave in that episode of season 1. So again, a total lack of continuity even inside of the show. I guess maybe he got scared and it somehow triggered him before the time that he was supposed to, because Michael almost killed him in this episode and the Emperor saved him, and so maybe because of the stress from that it somehow triggered it before the time it was supposed to or something. So I don't know, that the show doesn't care. Obviously the show itself doesn't care about its own internal continuity, so why should I bother trying to come up with excuses for it? So obviously it doesn't make any sense. And then in the end the Guardian says that Saru will live on and will save many other people and all of that. So obviously he's saying that timeline, the new timeline that was created, will keep going. It's not the end of that timeline. So was the whole new universe created now or what? So this was a big missed opportunity not to explain these things. When you have a character who is now a human character, who used to be the mysterious Guardian of Forever, who only talked in riddles and said that he's unable to show things differently, suddenly he can become a human with a sense of humor and tell jokes and just talk with you normally. So this was such an opportunity to actually get some answers and actually establish some interesting facts and all of that, and they talk about alternate timelines and all of that. But no, they just missed it. So he just opens the door and says that Georgiou can now go back to the past after passing his test, proving that he's not evil anymore, and so he will send her to a time closer to when the mirror universe was still close to our timeline, and so that way she won't die, presumably. And so this is all a setup for her own Section 31 spin-off show, and they never stated specifically what time period she's going to, and they never showed it. So I'm guessing it can be anywhere in the past. It might be in the Deep Space Nine timeline or whatever. Maybe that's what they're planning. Maybe she'll be the one behind Section 31, which we saw in Deep Space Nine. God forbid, that would be so terrible. The whole idea of the Section 31 show is a terrible idea that I hope will never happen, but they seem to be setting it up. But at least she's gone from this show. At least that's the final episode that we'll see her in this show, and they tell everyone that she died, and so good riddance. We will not see her anymore in this show. So one good thing came out of this episode, that they got rid of this character in this show. So good riddance. That's the only good thing about this episode. I guess it was kind of nice to see a new version of the Guardian of Forever. It was kind of an interesting special effect, even though it looks kind of like the Time Tunnel, which is a totally different science fiction show from the 60s, and so maybe it was a deliberate homage to that as well, I don't know, but it was kind of nice and neat to see it, and I predicted it. So it's nice to be right in my predictions, but it was not surprising. Was that twist, was that reveal supposed to be amazing or something? Because it wasn't. It was kind of silly that he suddenly spoke with the voice from TOS, and then in the end, when it all disappeared in a flash of light, it sounded like the Q flash. And so are they implying that the Q are also guardians of the timeline or whatever? So I don't know. I don't think the show knows. And in the end of the episode, Michael just lets everyone assume that Georgiou died on that planet, and so no one knows what happened to her. And then they all raise a glass of wine for her, and then they all talk about her as if they all loved her. And that was also so ridiculous. And then people are actually crying for her. Like Michael, as always, is crying, and also in that goodbye scene, both of them were crying, of course. And then in the end, when they raise a glass for her honor, and they all talk about the things they loved about her, and I'm like, seriously? You loved her? She was constantly annoying everyone and almost killing everyone, and it was just such a huge risk to even keep her around when she can kill and murder everyone in an instant for no reason. And they suddenly revealed they all loved her secretly. They all admired her and loved her, and so that's such a ridiculous scene. And then Michael says, she was like a mother to me and all of that. And I'm like thinking, how many mothers did you have? You had like 3 mothers. You have your real mother who became a time traveler and made 800 jumps across time, and then ended up in a totally different timeline than the one she started in, and somehow she's fine. How come her mother doesn't have this sickness as Georgiou has? Because her mother also ended up in a totally different timeline, and she jumped through that wormhole without the suit on and survived somehow, and she said she made 800 jumps in time over 1,000 years difference, and she doesn't suffer any side effects somehow. So you have your real mother who invented the time suit. Maybe the time suit prevented her from getting sick. So how come they didn't go and ask her? I mean, she's on Vulcan, right? Or Nivar, as it's called now. So how come they didn't contact her to ask her advice on what to do when Georgiou is dying from time travel, and ask, how come you're not dying from it because you made 800 jumps across 950 years and you don't have any side effects? You ended up in a different timeline and you also no side effects. So why the hell not? So you have that mother, you have Sarek's wife, Amanda, who is your second mother. Now you have the original Georgiou, and now you have the mirror Georgiou. So you have 4 different mothers. And so it's just so ridiculous. At least all of this is finished finally. The only interesting bit about all of that was that he mentioned that he was part of the temporal war and all of that people tried to use him to kill other people. So that could have been interesting to see. So of course we won't see it. Anything that is interesting to see, we're not seeing. So Lorca was mentioned 50 times in this episode, so he's not showing up, so just a huge cop-out. You know what they should have done? They should have had the Guardian say that he's creating a new timeline just for her or something like that. Because, they could have had Michael ask, how are you sending her into the past? Will it not affect our future here? Will it not ruin this time? And then he will say, no, I'm sending her to a separate timeline to yours because all of you are actually in a new timeline that was created, which is different from the one before, and I'm sending her to yet another timeline, and so all of them are separated and are not affecting each other. That could solve all the future continuity problems, which I'm sure they will keep creating and messing things up. So with the Guardian actually there in the flesh talking with you, you could have used him to explain all of this. You could have said, it's creating a new timeline for each show basically, and then it would fix all the future continuity problems. But maybe they don't want to do it. Maybe they want to tie it all together, and so they don't want to say it's all in a different timeline, so they want to keep everything ambiguous. But that's kind of my headcanon. That's the only way to stay sane. That's the only way to kind of ignore all the continuity mistakes they keep having, by simply saying each show and maybe each episode is a different timeline, because they can't even keep up continuity inside of each show by itself. And so just like with the mirror stuff, which doesn't fit what we saw previously, so maybe this was a different timeline from the beginning of the previous episode. So ever since she arrived in the mirror universe, it's not the same exact mirror universe, it's a different one, and that's why things play out differently. Otherwise it makes no sense. So after they finish with this whole plotline with Georgiou, now they return to the usual overall season-long plot of discovering what caused the burn and all of that. And so they're now thinking about going to that nebula where there is a distress signal, that for 3 episodes they know there's a distress signal, and no one even suggests just spore jumping in there and checking it out. No, instead they're trying to hack into that ship from a great distance and whatever. And I can understand, safety reasons and all of that, but why not spore jump to a distance that will be safe? Like, you don't have to always spore jump right into the middle of the action. You can leave a little bit of distance, right? So check it out from a closer distance than you are now, but not right on top of it. So instead, no, they're trying to contact that ship, they're trying to hack into it by subspace from a long distance, and they cannot for some reason until Book shows up. And this is when it's kind of funny, and intentionally, because just in the previous episode, Book suddenly wants to join Starfleet, even though in the first episode of this season he was making fun of Starfleet. He was saying how silly it is, this whole idea of Starfleet, and it's all a myth, no one believes in them anymore, they don't exist anymore. And now it turns out that everybody does know about them, because this Orion Syndicate, or whatever they're calling it, that is now ruling the galaxy, apparently it is very much aware of the remaining of Starfleet, its big enemy, and so on. And so how come Book thought just a few episodes ago, in the beginning of the season, he thought that Starfleet is just a myth, it's a ghost from the past and all of that. But now it turns out that it does exist, and now that he knows it, he wants to join up immediately, even though he was poking fun at the whole idea of it in the first episode. So now he wants to be a member of Starfleet, but he has to prove himself. Saru told him in the previous episode, you have to prove yourself somehow when the moment comes and all of that. So in this episode, he just shows up with some device that can help them make contact with that other ship. So why didn't he tell that to Saru in the previous episode? Like, Saru told him, you have to prove yourself somehow, and then the following episode he just shows up with some device that he had on his ship. So why did you wait? Why did you not do it in the previous episode? So suddenly he shows up with exactly the thing they need. And how come Starfleet doesn't have this technology, if there is this technology to enhance your long-range sensors or communication? That those Orion guys have it, but Starfleet doesn't have it, even though it's a Starfleet ship they're now contacting. And so really Starfleet in the 32nd century still doesn't have a way to contact ships in the same galaxy without the subspace relays, which all went down somehow. So seriously, so the Orions do have it and Starfleet doesn't have it, and Book happened to have it, and because of that he is now proven himself, because he had a piece of technology on his ship which he now gave them, and suddenly he's okay, suddenly he's all good. So in the next episode, I guess they will go to that place to figure out what happened there. So why couldn't they just do that? Why did they need to first make the long-range connection before just spore jump? If the spore jumped closer to it, then they wouldn't need all of this. I guess they just had to find something for Book to contribute to. So that's why they had to have this subplot. So all of this is so ridiculous, and it's so drawn out, and it's so boring. So I'm starting to think this season, which when it started I was saying this season might be much better than the show was before, because they seem to be improving, but so far the overall plot of the season is kind of ridiculous. So it's all about finding out what caused the burn and I guess preventing it or something, and so I don't know. The whole overall season story arc is kind of lame, even compared to the previous seasons, because as I said, the ideas were actually good. I kind of like the idea of showing us the Klingon Federation war. So the first season was all about that, but they never actually showed it. They barely showed it. They were all just talking about the war, but we never actually got to see any cool action scenes in space. Only a little bit, and they were done poorly, not in an impressive way. And then in season 2 they had the whole plot about the Red Angel and all of that, and it was kind of a very convoluted time travel plot. And I actually think it had a lot of clever ideas. So the overall story of season 2 I actually kind of like, except they messed up all the details. They didn't pay attention to the details. They forgot a lot of things they set up. I made a whole long convoluted video trying to explain all of that. So I think they failed in the execution and the details, but some of the overall ideas were actually good. But the ideas in this season, the overall story of the season is really lame. So it's all about finding out what happened in the burn, and that's it. That's the whole plot of the season. Another stupid thing in this episode that makes no sense is that Georgiou seems to be totally unaware of the fact of how she got here. Like, she seems to remember all the things that she experiences, like knowing Saru and all of that, yet she totally forgets how she got back into this universe. Did she forget that she walked through a door, and that isn't she supposed to be aware of the fact that she might be under some sort of test, or that she has limited time to heal herself or something? She does still have that bracelet with the lights that shows her the time she has left, which never changes color. The whole episode, it's green, it's okay. So it's not any kind of ticking clock situation. And so what was even the point of this bracelet? It's useless in this whole 2 episodes that it was established. They gave her this bracelet with the timer that she's the closer she gets to dying, she's supposed to know about it. Yet it's never useful for the plot in any way. So it was just filler, it's just totally pointless. But she still has it on her hand, and she is looking at it and touching it and hiding it from other people. So she is aware of everything that came before, right? So isn't she supposed to know that she's on borrowed time here, that she's at any moment she might be pulled back into the future? Or maybe she's not supposed to change anything because it's all a test or something. So she seems to be totally unaware of all of these questions. And isn't she the emperor of the whole galaxy in this new timeline? Because they said this emperor rules the whole galaxy somehow. So how come she's not trying to do anything? Why doesn't she invite all the scientists, all the best scientists from the galaxy to figure out how to fix you or something? So she doesn't, she's totally walking blind in the situation and just trying to change things for her own advantage, and that somehow passes the test. The fact that she tries to remain the ruler of the empire just because she saved Saru from not being eaten because she prefers him as a slave instead, that somehow proves to the Guardian that she's not evil anymore. So nothing makes sense if you think about it. So all of this was pointless, just a waste of time. They just wanted to reuse these uniforms, I guess, which were kind of cool. I did like that in the first season. But there it serves some kind of purpose, and here it's totally for nothing. So just because they wanted to show the Mirror Universe again, so they did this episode. And also the Mirror Doctor was here as well, and yet Stamets didn't know him in those episodes, in the old ones. Because when he was stuck in the mycelium network with the other Stamets, and his Hugh died, and then he saw him in the network, and then he said his name, but the other Stamets was surprised. The other Stamets was said, Who are you talking about? So he didn't even know the other Doctor, and yet he's here on the ship together with everyone. And I think the alternate timeline excuse is the only one that would actually make any sense, because the moment she goes back into the past, then the timeline has to change according to the old rules, back when it was just a single timeline supposedly, and they always had to come back and fix things, otherwise their own reality would change. And so they kind of changed that back in the 2009 movie when they said the different timelines can coexist, and so even if you go back and change something, you basically start a new universe and your old one still does exist. Which I think was just an excuse they invented not to piss off the fans, to tell them, oh, your old continuity, it all still exists somewhere. I think that's okay, and that actually makes more sense than the single timeline theory. So I don't actually mind this kind of retcon, and we can also say that it depends on what kind of technique you use to time travel. So maybe some technologies, some techniques, you do end up destroying your own timeline, and other ones you create another universe or go into another universe. And so we can assume all of those options are possible depending on how you do it and all of that. And so since the Guardian of Forever is kind of a sentient being and maybe kind of related to the Q, maybe it can control it and protect the timeline, and so it might decide to send her into a separate timeline, so any actions she does in the past will not affect this one. And it's the only excuse to allow for this to be possible, and for Michael to agree with this, and for her to come back to the Discovery, and everything is exactly the same as when she left, as if Georgiou didn't really affect the past in any way, which makes no sense. If she's going to have her own Section 31 show, then obviously she's going to do things maybe to save the whole galaxy and all of that. So what happened without her? So was she so unimportant in her own show that she didn't save the whole galaxy and changed all the history and all of that? Someone else did it instead of her, so she was not really important the story, and so it makes no sense. So if she went back in time and did some also epic things in the past, then obviously it will have an effect on this future and it will change things. And yet nothing changed at all. So that means she has to have gone into a different timeline. So maybe they should have actually mentioned that in the dialogue, and then it would actually be a neat excuse, and it would even allow for them to do continuity mistakes later. So why didn't they? And as for the Q thing, I'm glad they didn't directly said it's related, it only was implied, and I think it's fine, it's kind of ambiguous, we can come up with our own theories regarding that, and I do think it would make sense to be related, just like, in some episodes of TNG, Q sometimes took Picard into the past and allowed him to relive some events in his life. In the episode Tapestry, he went back into his own younger body and changed things, and Q even gave him a personal promise that nothing except him will change in the galaxy. So basically guaranteed personally that no big changes will happen to the timeline, and that's why Picard agreed to try to change his past and all of that. So it's kind of a neat idea that the Q are so powerful that they would be able to kind of protect the timeline, and maybe that's their job. Maybe they are supposed to be doing those kinds of things to protect the universe from the actions of all the lowly humanoids and all of that. So that actually would be a neat way to explain things, even though I don't think it's a good idea to go too much into that realm, because it will just bring up so many questions. It's almost like going into fantasy and religion, talking about angels and gods fighting and all of that. And Stargate SG-1 did that a little bit too much for my taste. It made the show too much like fantasy and too many religious stuff, and so it makes it, once you have magical beings like that who actually intervene and do things, then it will beg the question, why don't they do it here and here and here? And so who needs the humans? Even if there are Q doing stuff like this, then they should save the universe. Why should we even bother to do anything? Just pray to them and they will do it. So that creates a whole bunch of problems in my opinion. So doing that a little bit once in a while and keeping it ambiguous is fine, but too much of it could be a bad idea in my opinion. So it's a good thing they didn't try to explain things too deeply, because it probably will just mess things up even more, raise even more questions. So it's okay to leave it mysterious and ambiguous, and all of that is fine, and a little bit of clues and hints is also interesting, so I don't really mind that. And it's kind of funny how the special effect inside the Guardian kind of looks like the time tunnel more than indeed the original Guardian, but again, I don't really mind that. Even some touches of Stargate and all of that, which I do think Stargate was probably inspired by the Guardian of Forever, as well as the Iconians and all of that. So I don't really mind if they do a little bit of homage to that. I don't consider it a rip-off if it's just some small similarity, like a nod to it, like a small reference to that, without stealing anything big, even though I do think in this show they stole a whole bunch of stuff, even from Stargate. The Klingon ships back in season 1 looked kind of like the gliders of the Goa'uld, and the way that some of the Klingon costumes kind of retracted was similar to how the Goa'uld costumes were like in the movie, and even the Discovery ship itself spinning like a Stargate and all of that. So there were some small similarities, but not anything huge. And the previous episode, when this guy Carl appeared, he kind of reminded me of the Ascended Anubis from season 8 of SG-1, when he was reading a newspaper which said everything that is happening in the universe and all of that. So a lot of similarities. So I do think Stargate probably also inspired a lot of things in this show, but it's just a little bit, so I don't really mind that. And if they take good things, at least it will make this show better, so I don't mind them borrowing some good ideas for a change. So overall, this episode did not annoy me as much as it could have. It actually had some decent ideas in my opinion, but it also had so much missed opportunity, and it could have been so much better than it was. And so that's kind of my thoughts on this. I hope it wasn't too long. Let me know what you think and we can discuss it in the comment section below, and I will see you all next time. Bye bye.